everybody, so we've got some breaking news for all you Mazda fans out there because there is an all-new CX-5 coming.
And that's a big deal because the CX-5 is a massive seller for Mazda that is, for the most part, a relatively small company. They've sold about 1.5 million of these since they came out in 2012 here in the States alone, and about 4.5 million globally. So it's a big deal for Mazda to update the CX-5.
That's a lot of cars, and what's crazy about this is if you remember a couple years back when they debuted the CX-50, a lot of people thought that CX-50 was going to replace the CX-5, because if you look at the lineup, right, CX-30 replaced CX-3, CX-70 of course replaced CX-7, CX-90, but believe it or not, even after the transition to CX-50, CX-5 is still the best-selling Mazda. So rather than kill that brand altogether, they've decided to come out with an all-new car, or at least they claim it's all new, but there's some stuff we need to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. But it makes sense that they're keeping the CX-5 around because this is a very hot portion of the segment. That size of vehicle, of crossover, is extremely popular. So it's not a bad thing for Mazda to have a couple options in this area. But let's talk about what's new about the 2026 CX-5.
Well, fundamentally, it does sit on a bigger platform than the old CX-5. So it's 4.5 inches longer in total and 3 inches longer in wheelbase. And that's how you know that it's not just a facelift, that it's actually got some more substantial engineering behind it. So they do claim it's all new. They do say it's a 2026 model year. Now, when you look at the design, it definitely feels CX-5, right? It's not completely changed.
You can tell that it's a new vehicle. The front end looks a little bit different. The tailgate looks a little bit different. And you can tell visually as well that it is longer.
Yeah.
And it sounds like a lot of this extra space they've added to the vehicle is going to be in the rear seats. So rear passengers will have some more room to stretch out and be comfortable, as well as the cargo area. They've also made the lift-over height to get things into the trunk of the cargo area a little bit lower. The trunk is longer. It's also a little bit taller. So it should be a more practical vehicle overall, but 4.5 inches longer is a decent amount of increase. It's also about 1/2 inch wider.
You can also really see the difference if you look at like the door areas. They do look quite a bit longer. And then there are some visual differences between the old one and the new one. Obviously, we talked about the front end, headlights a little different, but then the actual badging is different in the back.
Yeah, so now we've got Mazda spelled out with individual letters, which I have mixed feelings about.
Okay.
In general, I don't dislike it, and it is kind of a departure, so you don't have the flying M Mazda logo on the back that you typically see. That logo is still on the front end. What do you think of Mazda spelled out along the tailgate?
You know, it's kind of become a little bit of a cliche now. Like every crossover, every crossover in SUV. I think Range Rover really started this, but now everything from like a Pathfinder to now the CX-5 has it spelled out, and I kind of like the little flying wings. So a little bit disappointed about that, but I think it's a pretty good looking redesign as a whole, and you can still get it in some of the famous Mazda colors as well, which is definitely a big win. Now, when we talk about the inside, I think that this is going to be the biggest change is the technology.
Absolutely, especially because we've got a massive 15.6 inch touchscreen in the center of the dash. Mazda is saying that this is the largest screen that they're offering in their vehicles. And it looks like it because that screen dominates the center of the dash. You still have a really sharp looking interior throughout the rest of the car. Mazda does a good job in general with materials, with design, with making a comfortable cabin. But the other thing that is nice about this big 15.6 inch screen is that it's got Google built in.
Yeah, that's right. So it was one of kind of the most controversial parts, I think, of the old car is that I know you've actually owned a Mazda with a similar setup, but the little scroll wheel that you use to navigate through the whole Mazda infotainment was very disliked by some and very liked by others. But now this new screen appears to be all touchscreen focused, right? And with Google built in, it means you have Google Maps, you've got the Google suite of apps that you can activate, you've got much more integrated voice commands as well.
Yeah, with Google Assistant, you'd be able to change all different kind of functions in the car, even going in as far as I believe the climate controls, you could tell Google Assistant to make adjustments to, which is nice because Mazda, part of the reason they did the scroll wheel is they didn't want people punching around on a touchscreen as they're driving.
Yeah.
And this screen at a glance maybe seems like a little bit of a departure from that, but with the Google Assistant, you could have some more functionality that you use voice control for, which is arguably even better than playing around with the scroll wheel.
No, I think from the inside, the most controversial thing is going to be just the sheer size of that available screen. right? And they do say available. I don't know what the standard screen is going to be, but look, it's definitely got a little bit of a flat screen TV look mounted there in the dash.
Jumbotron.
Yeah. But there's going to be some other interior changes that you're going to notice. For example, the steering wheel's also gotten rid of the flying wing design. It now spells out Mazda across the airbag in the middle. And then there's some carryover things as well. So if you look kind of down by the center console where the shifter is, that appears to be pretty much identical to the current one.
Yeah, and that is a little bit of the theme, something that you brought up at the beginning of the video, where they've made quite a few changes, especially if you peek under the skin in some areas, but there's also a lot with this car that looks very familiar. So if you were waiting for a new CX-5 because you thought it would be dramatically different and would set itself way apart from the old CX-5, there's really quite a few similarities, and that goes as well to the powertrain. We've got a very familiar 2.5 liter Skyactiv G 4-cylinder engine, 187 horsepower, 185 pound-feet of torque, and what is today a rather old school 6-speed automatic.
Right. So I think that Mazda is one of the last companies that still uses a 6-speed automatic, right? Yeah. And it's been tried and true, and it works well enough, but they're definitely lagging behind the competition in terms of like some of the 8 and then now the 10 speeds that are available depending on the market, right? Or the manufacturer. It appears that this engine is a carryover from the old one. And what's a little bit interesting is there's no talk in here about them launching a turbo, right? So it's only the naturally aspirated 186 horsepower option. And what they say in the press release is this 2.5S powertrain has proven itself as a popular, reliable offering for Mazda. And then they say the latest iteration has been recalibrated for greater flexibility, offering sharper response and a quiet demeanor. But basically what they're saying is it's largely a carryover powertrain with some tweaks. The big news, though, is that there is going to be an electrified alternative coming, which is the hybrid version, and that's supposed to come in about 2027.
So that's what we would have to look forward to if you want some alternative powertrain, something that will presumably have a little bit of extra power over this 187 horsepower and be a more modern powertrain.
Yeah.
But at launch, seems like it's just going to be this 2.5 liter that is a very familiar engine. My first car back in 2014 had this motor. So.
Yeah, that's crazy. Now, as I understand it, the upcoming hybrid is not going to be what they've done with the CX-50, where they just essentially reuse a Toyota hybrid system, right? So like the CX-50 uses a hybrid system from a RAV4. Apparently, this new CX-5 is going to use an all-new Mazda in-house hybrid system, but that's a pretty significant weight, especially in this hyper-competitive small SUV class.
And for arguably their most important car.
Yeah, and when you've got vehicles like the Honda CR-V, where the majority of those sold are going to be the hybrid configurations, I think that Mazda should have launched this with an all new hybrid. And then the other interesting thing too is the Mazda, so standard all-wheel drive, as is the case with Mazda SUVs, but the Mazda lineup, right? You for a while now you've had CX-5 and CX-50, which have been kind of competing more or less for the same dollars, right? They're both kind of that small crossover class. But the CX-50 has differentiated itself because it's a little bit more rugged, but more importantly, it's a little bit bigger, right? But now that the CX-5 is essentially going to be the exact same size as the CX-50, I'm going to be curious to see how they differentiate themselves. Are they going to do that rugged versus street thing? What are they going to do?
I don't know. Yeah, it's a good question. But it seems that there's so many people interested in crossovers and SUVs that it's almost difficult to cannibalize your own sales.
That's true.
Look at Toyota's lineup, for example. They've got so many SUVs, and yet they still sell really well. So Mazda, maybe they'll have similar success with both the CX-5 and the CX-50, being that this size of crossover, this segment of the market is just massive. You really can't overstate how many people buy these kind of vehicles.
So I think from my standpoint, where I'm at with this thing is I like the redesign. I think the design tweaks are good. I like that it has more space. That's something CX-5 has been needing for a while now. I like the new tech. I think that's going to really help it in the marketplace. I am disappointed in the engines. And finally, we don't know what it's going to cost. So that's going to be announced closer to launch. But this is a 2026 model year. So hopefully we're going to see it here by the end of the year.
Exactly. So let us know what you think in the comments below. Has Mazda done enough with the new CX-5? That's all for this video, and thanks for watching.
Thanks, guys.